Melissa Carter was supposed to become Melissa Carter Hart on a warm spring afternoon, but by nightfall, her name would appear in headlines as a murder victim, killed just steps from her own wedding reception, with her best man, Jason Clarke, at the center of a twisted, obsessive secret that would tear lives apart and shock an entire town. In the town of Oak Ridge, nestled between forested hills and winding country roads, life moved slowly. People greeted each other by name. Stores closed early on Sundays, and most of the town's news came by word of mouth or from the small local paper delivered every Friday morning. It was the kind of place where secrets didn't stay hidden for long, but the calm, quiet rhythm gave people a false sense of security, a belief that nothing truly dark could ever happen there. Daniel Reed was one of Oak Ridge's most respected young men. At 32, he had built a successful construction company from the ground up, taking over a failing business and turning it into a thriving operation known for quality work and fair pricing. People liked him. He volunteered during flood season, helped coach Little League, and always had time for his neighbors. His story was the kind of small-town success people were proud of. Melissa Carter had lived in Oak Ridge all her life. She worked as a counselor at the local high school, where she was known for her calm demeanor and ability to get even the most withdrawn teens to open up. Her compassion extended beyond her job. She was the first to organize charity events, bake sales and fundraisers for sick students or struggling families. Her warmth seemed to radiate from her, and there was hardly a person in town who hadn't, in some way, been touched by her kindness. Daniel and Melissa's relationship seemed inevitable. They met at a summer barbecue hosted by mutual friends, and according to those who were there, the connection was instant. They had the kind of chemistry that made people believe in fate. Their first date led to many more, and within a year, Daniel had moved into Melissa's cottage-style home near the edge of town. From there, things progressed like a fairy tale. Trips to the lake, Sunday dinners with family, holiday photos in matching sweaters. When Daniel proposed to Melissa during a surprise getaway in the mountains, she said yes without hesitation. The engagement was announced at the town's fall festival, and the celebration was nothing short of a local holiday. Shops hung banners congratulating the couple, and the local bakery created a special cupcake flavor in their honor. It was a moment when everyone in Oak Ridge felt like part of something joyful. Planning the wedding became a community affair. People donated time, helped set up decorations, and offered to lend everything from chairs to string lights. The ceremony would take place at Lake Haven, a scenic spot just outside town known for its serene waters and picturesque views. It had long been a popular venue for weddings, and Melissa had dreamed of getting married there since she was a little girl. She often told people she wanted to say her vows with her bare feet in the grass, surrounded by the people she loved most. Among those people was Jason Clarke, Daniel's childhood best friend. The two had grown up together in Oak Ridge, inseparable, from kindergarten through high school. But after graduation, Jason left town, moving to the city for college, and later working as a freelance photographer. Over the years, he and Daniel kept in touch sporadically, holiday cards, the occasional phone call, but nothing close to what they once had. When Jason returned to Oak Ridge just months before the wedding, it was a surprise to many. He said he was taking a break from city life, wanting something quieter, more grounded. Daniel was thrilled to see his old friend again and wasted no time inviting him back into his life. He asked Jason to be his best man, and Jason accepted. The town welcomed him warmly, remembering him as the bright, artistic teenager who used to photograph local events for the school paper. Jason quickly became part of the wedding planning. He offered to take engagement photos, helped scout locations, and even took over some of the more stressful tasks to ease the pressure on Melissa and Daniel. He had a talent for making things look perfect, flowers arranged just right, lighting adjusted to capture a soft glow, tables lined up with exact precision. He seemed genuinely happy to help, and most people admired his energy and attention to detail. To outsiders, everything looked ideal. But beneath the surface, something had started to shift. Melissa, usually steady and focused, seemed distracted. She missed planning meetings, cancelled appointments, and grew distant from her sister and closest friends. She brushed off their concerns, blaming wedding stress and long work hours. Daniel noticed too, but chalked it up to nerves. He was too busy finalizing details, managing family expectations, and running his business to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Jason's presence grew, more prominent. He was everywhere, at fittings, at tastings, even accompanying Melissa to the florist when Daniel couldn't make it. Some guests whispered that he was unusually close to the bride, but others dismissed it. Jason had a way of putting people at ease, making them believe everything he did was in service of the couple's big day. No one suspected that something inappropriate was happening. Melissa and Jason never gave anyone a reason to doubt them, at least not openly. They were careful, always keeping up appearances, always maintaining just enough distance in public. But the truth was far more complicated than anyone realized. Quiet moments, away from the crowds, the decorations, and the constant pressure, lines had been crossed. What began as harmless conversations turned into deeper confessions. Melissa found herself opening up to Jason in ways she hadn't with Daniel in years. Jason listened with intensity, making her feel seen and understood. She felt conflicted, ashamed, and exhilarated all at once. By the time the wedding invitations were mailed, Melissa was stuck in a place she couldn't escape. Her heart was divided, her conscience heavy. But she said nothing. The date was set, the dresses ordered, and the expectations of an entire town rested on her shoulders. She told herself it was a phase, a mistake she could quietly leave behind once she said, "I do." What she didn't realize was that Jason had no intention of letting her go. What had started as friendship, then passion, had turned into obsession. He watched her closely, studied every reaction, and began to believe that she belonged with him, not Daniel. In his mind, the wedding wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something else. Something darker. The town of Oak Ridge continued its quiet rhythm, unaware that its most anticipated wedding was about to become the center of a tragedy no one could have imagined. The signs were there, hiding in plain sight. But by the time anyone noticed, it would already be too late. Jason Clarke had always been good at hiding his true feelings. Even as a boy, he learned how to smile when he was hurting, how to laugh when he felt like screaming. Over the years, this ability to mask his emotions became a skill he relied on, especially as he drifted through adulthood, searching for something permanent. When he returned to Oak Ridge, he told people he wanted a simpler life. But in truth, he had nowhere else to go. His career as a freelance photographer had stalled, relationships had failed, and he was drowning in quiet resentment over how easily others seemed to find happiness while he remained lost. When Jason reconnected with Daniel, it was familiar and easy. They slipped back into their old friendship like nothing had changed. Daniel welcomed him without question, grateful to have his best friend back in his life during one of the most exciting times he could imagine. He introduced Jason to everyone, brought him to family dinners, and trusted him completely. For Jason, this acceptance was bittersweet. He was grateful, but underneath it all, There was a sharp sting, a quiet envy that Daniel had built something so stable and full of love while he had nothing but scattered memories and unfinished dreams. The first time Jason saw Melissa again, it hit him like a wave. He remembered her from their teenage years, friendly, smart, always just out of reach. But now, she seemed different. She was beautiful in a way that wasn't showy, composed in a way that drew people in. The way she carried herself, the way she looked at Daniel, the way she laughed softly in conversation, it all fascinated him. At first it was admiration. Then it became something more, something dangerous. As wedding preparations picked up, Jason found himself spending more and more time with Melissa. At first it made sense. Daniel was busy juggling clients and deadlines, so Jason often stepped in. He drove Melissa to appointments, helped her, assembled decorations, and offered a listening ear when she seemed overwhelmed. She began to lean on him, not out of attraction, but out of convenience. He was kind, supportive, and always knew the right thing to say. But Jason wasn't just helping. He was watching, learning, noticing the moments when Melissa seemed unsure about the wedding, the times she hesitated before answering questions about the future, the way her smile faltered when no one else was looking. He took those small cracks and convinced himself they were signs, proof that she wasn't as certain about Daniel as she pretended to be. Over time, Jason began inserting himself into Melissa's life in subtle ways. He would show up with coffee before she had time to make her own. He would text her jokes late at night, claiming he couldn't sleep. He offered to redo the couple's engagement photos because he wasn't happy with the lighting, just to spend more time with her. Melissa didn't push him away. Maybe she didn't see the pattern, or maybe she was too exhausted from juggling everything to stop it. At first, Melissa thought she was imagining things. Jason's compliments lingered a little too long. His hugs felt tighter than necessary, and his gaze held hers in ways that made her uncomfortable. But he was Daniel's best friend. She didn't want to cause a rift or raise suspicions. She told herself he was just being overly friendly, harmless. But deep down, something about it felt off. One afternoon, while going over table arrangements, at her kitchen counter, Jason brushed her hand as he reached for a pen. It wasn't an accident. The touch sent a chill through her, not from excitement, but from a strange, creeping sense of being watched, hunted. She quickly pulled away and pretended not to notice. Jason smiled like nothing had happened, but the air between them had changed. After that, Melissa became more careful. She stopped replying to his late-night texts, avoided being alone with him, and tried to steer conversations back to the wedding or Daniel. But Jason noticed the shift, and it only fed his obsession. In his mind, Melissa wasn't pulling away. She was confused, torn between loyalty to Daniel and the passion he believed they shared. He told himself that she needed time, that he had to be patient. But patience wasn't Jason's strength. As the wedding day crept closer, his actions grew bolder. He began leaving small notes in Melissa's car, typed, unsigned messages that said things like, "Are you sure this is what you want?" and "Some choices can't be undone." At first, she thought it was just stress playing tricks on her. But when the notes kept coming, she realized someone was trying to frighten her. She never imagined it could be Jason. Not at first. Melissa started having trouble sleeping. She became jumpy, distracted. Her sister noticed but chalked it up to wedding nerves. Even Daniel, usually so tuned into her moods, missed the signs. He was drowning in last-minute details and didn't see how deeply unsettled Melissa had become. She didn't tell him about the notes. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't want to cast a shadow over what was supposed to be the happiest time of their lives. But Jason wasn't just sending notes. He had started following her, watching from his car when she stayed late at work, standing across the street when she visited the florist. He convinced himself it wasn't wrong. He was protecting her, watching over her, making sure she was okay. That's what people did when they loved someone, wasn't it? Then one night, a week before the wedding, Melissa returned home to find her front door unlocked. Nothing was missing, but her bedroom window was open, and a single white rose lay on her pillow. Her heart pounded in her chest as she searched the house. She wanted to believe she had simply forgotten to lock up, that the flower was from Daniel, or maybe part of a delivery mix-up. But she knew deep down that it wasn't random. She sat, alone on her couch, gripping the rose with shaking hands, realizing that whatever was happening was no longer harmless. She thought about canceling the wedding, about telling Daniel everything. But fear held her in place, fear of causing pain, fear of humiliation, and fear that no one would believe her. Jason had made sure his public persona was spotless, friendly, helpful, loyal. No one would suspect him. As the days ticked down, Melissa felt like she was sleepwalking through her own life. She smiled for photos, rehearsed her vows, and checked off boxes on her to-do list. But inside, her mind was racing. She was walking a tightrope with no safety net. Something terrible was coming. She could feel it. She just didn't know when, or how it would arrive. Jason, on the other hand, was certain of everything. He believed he understood Melissa better than anyone else, that Daniel didn't truly see her, that she had feelings for him, hidden, maybe, but real. And if she didn't admit it before the wedding, he would force her to. He told himself he was doing it for love. But what he was really doing was preparing for something irreversible, something he thought would bring them together. The stage was set. The wedding day was coming. And neither of them could turn back. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and golden, the sky painted in soft shades of blue and peach. Birds chirped in the distance, and the quiet calm that hung over Oak Ridge felt like the beginning of a perfect day. Guests were already arriving at Lake Haven, a serene venue surrounded by tall pines and still waters that reflected the early light like glass. Rows of white chairs lined the grassy shore, facing an arch wrapped in cream-colored roses and eucalyptus branches. It was the wedding Melissa had always imagined, and everything looked just the way she had planned it. But behind the flawless setup, Melissa Carter was unraveling. She stood alone in the bridal suite, her dress draped across a hanger, untouched. Her hair had been done an hour ago, pinned up in soft curls, and her makeup was finished to perfection. But she couldn't stop shaking. The smile she gave the photographer was forced, her eyes dull behind layers of mascara. The wedding planner knocked gently to let her know the guests were nearly seated, but Melissa barely responded. She kept glancing at her phone, reading and rereading a message she had typed but never sent. Her hands hovered over the screen, unsure. A single sentence. "I need to tell you something before it's too late." But she couldn't press send. Outside, Daniel paced with nervous energy. He looked handsome in his dark suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes polished until they gleamed. His groomsmen clapped him on the back, laughing and joking as they waited, but his focus remained fixed on the path from the bridal suite to the ceremony arch. He hadn't spoken to Melissa since the night before. They had agreed to keep the morning traditional, no contact until she walked down the aisle, but something about the silence unsettled him. He shook off the feeling, chalking it up to nerves. In a few short minutes, she would appear, and everything would fall into place. Jason Clarke stood a few feet away, calm and collected. He wore a crisp gray suit and a cool smile that masked the storm inside him. He had barely slept. His thoughts had spun in endless circles all night, playing out scenarios, convincing himself that Melissa would finally choose him. He believed she wouldn't go through with the wedding. He believed she would come to him. And if she didn't, he had another plan. As guests settled into their seats and soft music floated across the lake, time seemed to slow. Every eye turned toward the path leading from the bridal suite. But Melissa didn't appear. 5 minutes passed, then 10. A few whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Daniel exchanged a glance with the officiant, who gave a small, unsure shrug. Jason, too, looked toward the bridal suite, but not with concern. His expression was something else. Hope, maybe, or anticipation. He checked his phone, but there were no messages. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides. Finally, the doors opened, and Melissa emerged. A collective sigh moved through the crowd as she stepped forward in her flowing white gown. She looked like a vision, radiant and composed. But only a few. People noticed the stiffness in her walk, the way her hands were clenched tightly around her bouquet. She moved like someone in a dream, going through motions she no longer believed in. As she reached Daniel, he smiled broadly and whispered something. Only she could hear. She gave a faint nod and took his hand. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke of love and commitment, of choosing each other every day. Melissa and Daniel recited their vows with trembling voices, exchanging rings under the arch as petals danced on the breeze. To everyone watching, it was a perfect moment. But Jason stood still, his smile frozen in place, his eyes never leaving Melissa. When she kissed Daniel, something inside him cracked. He clapped along with the crowd, but his hands barely made a sound. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The reception began in the grand pavilion by the water. Lights twinkled overhead, and the scent of fresh-cut flowers filled the air. Guests laughed and danced, drinks flowed, and plates of food disappeared as the evening unfolded. The newlyweds made their entrance to cheers and applause, cutting their cake and sharing their first dance as husband and wife. Melissa kept smiling, but her eyes were far away, her grip on Daniel's hand slightly too tight. Jason gave his best man speech during dinner. He stood at the head table, microphone in hand, and addressed the guests with practiced charm. He spoke about friendship and loyalty, about watching Daniel grow into the man he was. He told a funny story from their childhood and ended with a toast to love that brought some guests to tears. But as he looked at Melissa, his words held a hidden weight. His gaze was intense, searching. Those who were paying attention noticed it, the way his eyes locked onto the bride, the way his voice faltered slightly at the end. After the speech, Melissa excused herself. She needed air. She told her maid of honor she would be back in a few minutes and slipped away from the crowd, making her way around the back of the pavilion toward the trees near the lake. The sun was setting, and the world was bathed in soft, orange light. The sounds of the reception faded behind her, replaced by the quiet rustling of leaves and the gentle lap of water against the shore. Jason followed her. Security footage later showed him walking quickly after her, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his expression unreadable. No one saw what happened next, not with their own eyes. There were no screams, no crashing sounds, just the soft whisper of wind and the distant hum of music. 10 minutes later, Jason returned alone. His jacket was gone. His shirt was wrinkled and stained with something dark. There were scratches on his neck. He slipped into the crowd unnoticed, grabbing a drink from the bar and sitting down as if nothing had happened. Then came the scream. A group of guests had wandered near the edge of the lake, searching for a better view of the sunset. One of them saw something white floating in the water, a veil tangled in reeds. Beneath it, something pale. Someone ran, shouting for help. The music cut off. People rushed toward the lake as panic spread through the crowd like a spark in dry grass. Melissa's body was pulled from the water moments later. Her bouquet lay nearby, the flowers crushed and soaked. A hush fell over the venue, followed by chaos. Guests cried out, others froze in shock. Daniel ran to her side, his hands shaking as he dropped to his knees. The scene dissolved into horror. Police arrived within minutes. The reception area was sealed off. Guests were told to stay where they were. The investigation began that night, under the fading light of what was supposed to be a perfect day. Nothing would ever be the same again. The hours following Melissa Carter's death were a blur of flashing lights, frantic whispers, and disbelief. Lake Haven, once a symbol of celebration, had transformed into a crime scene. Police tape lined the perimeter. The once beautiful wedding decor now looked out of place. White roses wilting under the weight of tragedy, fairy lights flickering, dimly over tables no one would sit at again. Guests, dressed in their finest clothes, stood in stunned silence or sat with their heads in their hands, trying to make sense of what had happened. No one could. Daniel Carter knelt by the lake, his hands trembling and stained with water and soil. Officers tried to pull him away from Melissa's body, but he wouldn't let go. He kept whispering her name as if saying it over and over might bring her back. Eventually, paramedics guided him to a nearby bench and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. He stared ahead, hollow-eyed, not speaking. Detective Rachel Monroe arrived shortly after sunset. A seasoned investigator with a reputation for cutting through chaos with calm precision, she took in the scene with a practiced eye. The victim was a young woman, dressed in a wedding gown, pulled from the lake under suspicious circumstances. There were no signs of an accident, no screams had been heard, no struggle had been witnessed. But something didn't sit right. The medical examiner conducted a preliminary inspection on site. Bruising around Melissa's neck suggested possible strangulation. There were small scratches on her arms and neck, inconsistent with falling into the water. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough for Detective Monroe to treat the case as a homicide. The guests were questioned one by one, led to a quiet room inside the pavilion. Many were too shaken to speak clearly. Some recounted seeing Melissa leave the reception alone. Others remembered Jason Clarke following shortly after. A few mentioned the intensity of Jason's gaze during his speech, though at the time it had seemed harmless. Just nerves, perhaps. Monroe listened carefully, taking notes, connecting dots. Jason, meanwhile, sat at a table near the back of the reception area. He hadn't tried to leave. He hadn't spoken much since the scream. When approached by officers, he complied without protest. He seemed calm, almost eerily so. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, his expression unreadable. Detective Monroe took charge of his questioning personally. Jason admitted he had followed Melissa after seeing her leave. He said he was concerned about her, that she'd seemed upset. According to him, they had a short conversation near the lake, but she wanted to be alone, so he left her there and returned to the party. He denied seeing anyone else in the area and claimed he had nothing to do with what happened. But there were problems with his story. Security footage showed him returning to the reception with visible changes in his appearance. No jacket, disheveled shirt, scratches on his neck. When asked about the scratches, he claimed he had tripped near the water and fallen against some branches. Officers examined the area but found no signs of a fall. No broken twigs, no disturbed soil. Melissa's maid of honor came forward next. Tearfully, she described how Melissa had been increasingly withdrawn in the weeks leading up to the wedding. She said Melissa had mentioned being uncomfortable around Jason, though she hadn't gone into detail. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it added weight to the growing suspicion. Then came the discovery of the notes. Inside Melissa's purse, investigators found several typed messages, unsigned and vague, suggesting doubt and fear. Phrases like, "Are you sure this is what you want?" and "You don't have to go through with it." The messages matched ones Melissa had received in her car weeks earlier. Though they couldn't be traced directly to Jason yet, they painted a picture of someone deliberately undermining her confidence and mental state. Monroe requested a search warrant for Jason's home and devices. While officers waited for approval, they continued to piece together his timeline. One groomsman mentioned seeing Jason near the parking lot earlier in the evening, pacing and muttering to himself. Another guest recalled Jason staring at Melissa during the rehearsal dinner, visibly upset. When the warrant came through, officers searched Jason's apartment. What they found was chilling. Dozens of printed photos of Melissa, some taken from a distance, some candid and clearly unauthorized. A few had been marked with handwritten notes in the margins, dates, observations, questions. There were also copies of the notes Melissa had received, saved on his laptop in a folder titled Unsent. It was clear he had been watching her, studying her, trying to influence her. Among the items seized was a small notebook. Inside, Jason had written long entries detailing his thoughts about Melissa. He described her as trapped, misguided, and afraid to follow her heart. He wrote about their connection and his belief that she secretly returned his feelings. In one disturbing passage, he mentioned the wedding day, speculating that she might come to him at the last moment, that if she didn't, he would help her see the truth. The evidence was overwhelming. Jason was arrested that night, taken into custody without incident. As he was led away in handcuffs, he didn't struggle or speak. He simply looked back toward the lake, his expression blank, as though something inside him had finally gone still. Word of his arrest spread quickly. Guests were allowed to leave the venue in small groups, still reeling from the day's events. What had begun as a celebration of love had ended in tragedy, betrayal, and death. Daniel remained at the lake until early morning, refusing to leave until Melissa's body was taken away. Autopsy results confirmed the cause of death as strangulation. Melissa had been killed before being placed in the water. The scratches on her neck matched the marks found on Jason's arms. Traces of his DNA were discovered under her fingernails. There was no more doubt. In the days that followed, Oak Ridge was consumed by the story. News outlets picked up the case, calling it the wedding day murder. Jason's face appeared on screens across the country. Neighbors and former classmates expressed disbelief. To them, Jason had always seemed quiet, but kind. No one imagined he was capable of something so cold, so calculated. Daniel shut himself away, avoiding calls and visitors. The home he had planned. to share with Melissa, now sat in painful silence. Her wedding dress remained draped over the chair where she had left it, untouched. Invitations, photos, and decorations were boxed up and stored away, too painful to look at. Detective Monroe continued her investigation, building the prosecution's case. She interviewed more guests, traced Jason's movements in the weeks before the wedding, and reviewed every message, every image. Her goal was simple: justice for Melissa. And yet, even with Jason in custody, there were questions that lingered. What had pushed him over the edge? Had there been a moment when things could have been stopped? Had Melissa known just how much danger she was in, answers would come. But for now, Oakridge mourned the loss of a young woman who had walked toward her future in a white dress, only to meet a nightmare hiding in plain sight. The trial began 6 months after Melissa Carter's murder. By then, Oakridge had changed. The town that once prided itself on peaceful streets and tight-knit communities now lived under a lingering shadow. People still left flowers by the lake at Lake Haven, and Melissa's face, smiling, radiant, forever 27, remained taped to storefront windows and pinned to corkboards in the town hall. Her story had traveled far beyond the borders of Oakridge, but to the people who had known her, she wasn't just a headline. She was a friend, a daughter, a bride, who never had the chance to become a wife. Jason Clarke stood in the courtroom with his head slightly lowered. His once clean-shaven face was now rough with stubble, and his eyes looked hollow. Dressed in a simple gray suit provided by the state, he no longer resembled the charming best man who had given a heartfelt toast just hours before Melissa died. The prosecutors portrayed him not as a man who lost control in a moment of heartbreak, but as someone who had planned his actions, who had obsessed, manipulated, and finally destroyed. The courtroom was packed each day. Reporters, friends of the family, and former classmates filled the wooden benches. Daniel Carter was there, sitting quietly with Melissa's parents, their grief etched into every line on their faces. He hadn't spoken publicly since the night of the murder, and now he kept his eyes fixed forward, listening to each word as the trial unfolded. The prosecution laid out the timeline carefully. They walked the jury through the weeks leading up to the wedding. The anonymous messages Melissa had received, the strange behavior from Jason at the rehearsal dinner, the speech that now seemed less sentimental and more unsettling in hindsight. Then came the evidence. Photos from Jason's apartment, pages of notes, messages saved on his devices. They described how he had followed Melissa, how he believed she should choose him, and how in his mind, her marriage to Daniel was a betrayal. Melissa's autopsy report was presented next. The medical examiner testified that the bruising on her neck was consistent with manual strangulation. The scratches and skin cells found under her fingernails matched Jason's DNA. A faint red mark, likely from a ring, had been left on her upper arm. The prosecution argued it was proof of a struggle. Melissa had fought back. Jason's defense attorney tried to cast doubt. He suggested that Jason and Melissa had shared a complicated past, and that the interaction at the lake might have turned tragic, but wasn't premeditated. He claimed Jason panicked, that it was a spontaneous, emotional moment that spiraled out of control. But the volume of evidence, the obsessive journal entries, and the eerie consistency in Jason's stalking behavior left little room for doubt. Witnesses were called, one by one. Melissa's maid of honor recounted how Melissa had grown distant in the days before the wedding, how she had found her staring blankly at her bouquet, how she had confided her doubts, not about marrying Daniel, but about someone who wouldn't let her go. Another guest described the silence at the reception after Melissa left, how Jason returned looking disheveled, yet calm. The groomsman who saw Jason near the lake moments before the scream became one of the key pieces in tying him to the scene. Then Daniel took the stand. He spoke softly, his voice steady but raw. He described how he met Melissa, how they built their life together, and how happy she had been before the wedding. He recounted how Jason had been a longtime friend, how he trusted him, invited him into their most important day, and how that trust had been betrayed in the worst way imaginable. His final words struck everyone in the courtroom. She walked down that aisle believing her future was just beginning. She never saw the danger standing just behind me. It took the jury less than a day to reach a verdict. Jason Clarke was found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, stalking, and evidence tampering. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no reaction as the sentence was read. No tears, no plea for forgiveness. Just silence. As officers led him away, someone in the courtroom whispered, "Good riddance," and no one disagreed. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters asked Melissa's parents for comments, but they declined. They simply said, "Justice was served," and walked away, holding hands. Daniel left through a side door, avoiding the press. He wanted no headlines, no statements. What he wanted had been taken from him long before the trial began. In the months that followed, life in Oak Ridge began to slowly move forward, though the scar remained. Lake Haven was closed temporarily, but reopened under new ownership. Its name changed and its history carefully rewritten for future couples. Some said the venue would never be the same, and they were right. The ghosts lingered, especially near the shore where Melissa had been found. A foundation was created in her memory, the Melissa Carter Trust, focused on raising awareness about obsessive behavior, emotional manipulation, and early signs of stalking. Her parents and friends led the initiative, giving talks at schools and organizing community events. The message was simple. Love doesn't come with fear. Daniel eventually moved away. He left the house he and Melissa had shared and took only a few boxes, photos, a worn-out book she used to read, the engagement ring he never got the chance to replace with a wedding band. He moved to a smaller town, where few people knew his story. Some said he never dated again. Others said he found quiet peace in solitude. But no one forgot the way he looked at Melissa that day, full of hope, full of love, never expecting that it would all come crashing down by nightfall. Jason remained in prison, isolated and largely forgotten. Occasionally, his name surfaced on internet forums or in true crime documentaries, but the world moved on. He had tried to control someone else's story, and in the end, it destroyed him too. Melissa's grave became a place of quiet reflection. People visited not just to mourn, but to remember her spirit, kind, joyful, full of light. The wedding that never was had become a warning, a lesson wrapped in tragedy. But it also became a symbol of resilience, of love that could not be erased, even by violence. And though Melissa's story ended in loss, her memory lived on, not just in sorrow, but in strength. The town of Oak Ridge would never forget her, and neither would the world.